Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
With you know good, Ann Camp, you're listening to the Ann Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson, and the Windy City representative, the baddest brother above the Mason-Dixon line, my play cousin, the Right Reverend Christopher Butler. let me tell y'all something real quick, man. Let me say something real quick to y'all, man. Anyone in the audience who watches college football, who cares anything about college football, already knows what's up. If you set your eyes on ESPN, Fox News, sports radio, or any kind of sports podcast, you already know what's coming. You already know that something glorious occurred last Saturday, and everybody in college football, everybody in this nation must acknowledge that moment. You must acknowledge what happened last Saturday night when the eyes of the world were all looking at Vanderbilt football. Now, this is what I want to tell you, because it's an emotional thing for me right now. You see what I'm saying? And I'm going to talk my talk. See, what you have to understand is that through many dangers, toils, and snares, through many trials and tribulations, through many storms, disappointments, and dreams deferred, the Vanderbilt Commodores, my college football team, where I played at, where I went to school at, beat the number one team in the nation, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Shout out to that team. I mean, the Vanderbilt football team came out fast. Everybody was expecting, okay, now it's time. It's halftime, second half. Now Alabama's going to come back and win. Everybody's expecting, a comeback, and it just never happened. The first thing I want to say about this game was Pavia, Vanderbilt's quarterback, is the real deal. Number two, that team, defensive line, offensive line, DBs, played their hearts out. And that coaching staff out-coached Alabama. They got them on their heels, and they kept them off balance the entire game. And it was amazing, because it's been a long time, a very long time, since way before I was born, that we had beat Alabama. Now, what I want you to know is that in years, even when I was there, we had some very close games and some very bad calls, I would say, that kept us from beating Alabama more recently. So don't go too far with that. But we will take the win. It was a great win. It's deserved. Them boys played hard, and I'm just proud of how they conducted themselves and how hard they played. It's just one of those games that you're not going to forget, and I'm not going to let you forget it. Now, one other thing I do want to say, we know this is a faith and politics podcast, but I'm going to talk my talk today. One other thing I want to say is I've had a lot of Georgia fans reach out to me and thank me for beating Alabama. And let me say this to any Georgia fan that thinks that for any reason that this would be to their benefit. I want to go on record and say, under no circumstances should anyone ever think, or should this ever be to the benefit of anybody from UGA. This win had nothing to do with you. I know you just lost to Alabama. I was cheering for Alabama when you lost. I just want to be straight up with you. In no way should this reflect on you, or should you benefit from this, because it ain't got nothing to do with you. All right? We're going to take this W. We're going to take this W for ourselves, and you still lost to Georgia. You still lost to Alabama. You still got to deal with that yourselves. So don't try to ride, on our victory to somehow feel better about your loss. No, you sit in that loss. You win your next games coming up. I don't think we play this year, which is good for y'all. But look, you're a great team. I appreciate the team. I just don't really like y'all that much because I live in Georgia and I'm not a Georgia fan. And when you live in a place and you're not a fan of that team, it can get somewhat annoying. So I just want to be very clear. This is not a victory for you guys. And in no way should you take it as a victory. All right? That's the good news. Now, let's get back into the Church Politics podcast. I had to talk about it, man. It was a major win. I'm proud of my team and again, how they played, how they conducted themselves. Anchor down. That's all I have to say. Anchor down. What a awesome game, and certainly one we will never forget. All right. Now, that's the good news. The bittersweet news is this, and our premium subscribers already know this. The bittersweet news is the baddest brother above the Mason-Dixon line, the Windy City representative, my play cousin, the Right Reverend Christopher Butler, has received some new opportunities and is doing some new things. All right. And so he will not be on the Church Politics podcast anymore. But let me tell you this. Ain't no scandals, ain't no hard feelings. He's still going to be on here. I'm going to pull him on here from time to time to be a special guest, as he did before he joined. And we love him, and we are supporting everything that he's doing and wishing him the best. But he won't be on the Church Politics podcast, okay? We will do this, though. I have already talked to him about having a farewell episode. So he's going to come back on. We're going to talk, and then he'll be a guest from there on out. But I enjoyed the time, man. What was it, 3-some years or whatever that he was on this podcast? I think he had a lot to add to it. I think our audience really enjoyed him. And so it does hurt a little bit to see him go, but you never hold people back. And the show must go on. So I'm going to keep giving you the quality content that you seek from the Church Politics podcast. All right. I'm going to keep giving that to you because I appreciate all of you, and we have to keep going. So let me say this. As always, I got to give a shout out to all our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. There's a reason that you get from us where you don't get from other places. It's because we are committed to saying things that others don't have an incentive to say or are disincentivized to say. But that means that we need your help and we need you to continue to support us. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure that you tell people about it if you want premium episodes. So we do these episodes, but we also do a premium episode for people who subscribe. Then you need to go to patreon.com/churchpolitics/churchpolitics. And when you subscribe there, you will get premium content. So for instance, this week's episode, premium episode, I'm going to talk about the Electoral College. Should we keep it? Should we get rid of it? What are the pros? What are the cons? That's going to be the conversation. You're not going to get that right now, but if you're a premium subscriber, then you will get it. We just want you to support the movement, allow us to make more content and keep this all going, all right? We would greatly appreciate it. Now, y'all know what it is. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but think like a Christian. And as always, I want to start with scripture. So let me go to Matthew. I'm going to go to the gospel. Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 through 37. Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 through 37. But I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Christians should know that what we say matters. Who we talk about and how we talk about them matters. And that it's a high standard when it comes to the things, the opinions, the information that comes out of our mouth, the attacks, whatever comes out of our mouth. There's a high standard that's set for us on how we should engage vocally, how we should engage when it comes to speech. Now, we know that within a democracy, within this constitutional republic, that there's also some standards for what we should say and what we should do. And there's also a freedom in what we can say. So we know that the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. Now, the first thing that you should know about this is a very broad protection. It's a very broad protection against censorship. It even covers messages on clothing, and it even covers symbolic speech like protests and things of that nature. Americans have the right to say what they want to say, even if what they have to say offends or hurts the feelings of others. Americans have the right to say what they want to say, even if it's a plainly bad or misinformed opinion that they are expressing. That is the general and very broad rule and principle that we live by. Okay? Now, there are very few exceptions to this principle. There are some exceptions, but very few exceptions. So you see exceptions to freedom of speech was like obscenity, right? Child pornography. Thank God that we have that restriction. True threats, right? Terroristic threats. So you can't go up to somebody and tell them that you will kill them. That's a threat, and that's not within your free speech protections. All right. Something else is directly inciting violence, slander, fraud, things of that nature. So what I'm trying to tell you right now is that you should be happy that you live in a country where you can express your convictions and express your opinions, even if it means people might get offended, or even if it means that you might get offended, or you might even be demeaned in some way by the words. Not pleasant, but it's a freedom that we have. And I truly believe, and I've said this before, that we as citizens should be willing to fight for the right for people to disagree with us. Because if we only think people should have freedom of speech who agree with us or share our religion or whatever, then we don't really believe in freedom of speech. That means we should stand up for that right, even for people who have very serious disagreements with us, not just on the small stuff that we can brush off, but on the stuff that hits at the core of what we believe, of our convictions. That's what this right means. Now, in our politics, I want to kind of describe to you where that has come into conflict as of late. And it's not a completely new thing, but I think the conversation is evolving in some good ways and also probably in some bad ways. Now, as many of you know, 2 years ago, Elon Musk bought Twitter for around $44 billion. After he bought it, he renamed it X. Now, I still call it Twitter, and it's not out of disrespect, but that's just what everybody knows it as, Twitter. It rolls off the tongue a lot better than X for a social media site. That's just me. No disrespect, but I still call it Twitter. Now, he essentially said that he bought Twitter as a means of protecting free speech in America, right? Musk is not only the owner of Twitter, but he just so happens to be the person with the most followers in the world on Twitter. Elon Musk has 200 million followers on Twitter. That means when he says something, a lot of people see it. When he retweets something, a lot of people are going to have that on their feeds. Now, with that in mind, on several occasions, I have seen Musk tweet and retweet conspiracy theories, false information on this platform. I mean, I've seen him retweet stuff about Pizzagate and a whole bunch of stuff about COVID that may or may not be true. Some stuff that is just clearly not helpful. And I also say this, while he does say that he is a free speech absolutist, meaning that there really are no exceptions to free speech. Let people say what they need to say. While he's a free speech absolutist, that's what he says he is, he has removed people from Twitter for what seemed to be his own interest too, right? And he does work with countries who don't give their citizens the freedom of speech. So that's something to keep in mind. Musk, I will say in general, Musk does seem to value free speech. But that commitment is a little bit shaky when it comes to his money, right? And so that's why you're not going to see Musk say anything negative about China. You're going to see him work with some countries that may not uphold the values that he claims to uphold. And so there's some compromise in what in what he's saying that he is versus what he has actually done in practice. The other thing that a lot of people are saying, and I've seen it to some extent, maybe not as much as other people, but I believe it's true to some extent. A lot of people are saying that the toxic communication on on Twitter, X, whatever, has increased since Elon Musk took over. In some circles, that's the consensus, that it's gotten way worse and the attacks have gotten worse because of the algorithms and who they allow to be on there without being regulated. And that's been a big issue for a lot of people. Okay? It's been a big issue, especially for people on the left. And so I want to play you this quick clip of Hilary Clinton talking about how social media, especially Twitter, should be regulated. All right. And this is on The Hill, which is usually The Hill Rising. So The Hill is a channel and Rising is the actual show. You should check it out. But check out this clip real quick.
Former Democratic presidential candidate Hilary Clinton has called for the repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Section 230 protects online platforms from being held liable for third-party content, which makes the internet work, like user content on social media. Watch her comments.
We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real harm.
So you saw the clip, and a lot of people on the right who saw that clip and commented on that clip really focused in on what she said about control. And like, what do you mean about control? You're not really supposed to have control of what people say. And maybe she was talking more generally, like the democracy in general doesn't have control over this misinformation. I'm not exactly sure what she meant, but a lot of people locked in on that. I think the big question here is, should social media platforms be regulated, and should they be responsible for what random individuals say on their platform? Now, I want to say this from my perspective. I'm not against all possible forms of regulation of social media, especially when it comes to kids, because social media right now, there's such big instruments in the public discourse, and they give kids a lot of access. So if somebody was to say, I'm going to regulate it for kids, I wouldn't be necessarily against that. Of course, I'd have to see the specifics of the bill and what that regulation looked like, okay? But I will say this, I'm skeptical of anything that could result in censorship. This is the issue with the conversation about misinformation. We can all agree that misinformation is bad, that there are people out there who are purposefully putting out bad information to mislead people. I wish there was no misinformation in our public discourse. That would be my wish. The question is it the government's role to stop misinformation? And if it is, who decides what the definition of misinformation is? When I look at something that may not be true, who's going to make that decision and who's going to enforce it? Sometimes misinformation is obvious. Sometimes it's not. And how do we make sure that when it's not very clear or it's a gray area, that the people that are in control aren't going to abuse their ability to get rid of information that they simply don't like, right? Now, here's the thing about Clinton, and something that we have to bring up when we talk about misinformation. I mean, this is one of the people that was pushing the Steele dossier. It's been found by the Washington Post, I think maybe even the New York Times and others, that the Steele dossier, much of the Steele dossier was fake, was false. It wasn't true. Our country had to listen to this for over a year, and it just wasn't true information. So my question is, would she get in trouble for pushing that misinformation? A harder case is this. There is a case where somebody was actually telling people, I guess, the wrong date for when they were supposed to vote, right? Basically, so certain demographics wouldn't go to vote on the right day and would actually miss the vote. That's problematic, right? My problem is, and let's be very clear, it's not just Democrats who are against 230 that she was talking about. There are Republicans, including Donald Trump at sometimes and sometimes not, that have said that should be repealed. But here's my question to you. Can we really trust either party to regulate what is misinformation? And the reason I ask this question is they've already had kind of a trial run. It's already been put out there that the president's administration was communicating with Facebook and Twitter before Elon Musk got it and telling them to censor some accounts. And now that we have more information, and we've talked about this several times, the information that they were censoring, some of it was about COVID. They were censoring people that actually ended up being right. So what they said was misinformation actually ended up being true information. So, for instance, when you talk about COVID, initially, people who said that it was likely that COVID came out of the Wuhan lab, those people were being censored. Now we see it's being admitted that the most likely place that this came from was the Wuhan lab, which seems like common sense. But guess what? Those people were being censored. And so when you guys think about censorship, all of us want to get rid of misinformation. But here's something that we got to keep in mind. You can't just think about regulating misinformation, because misinformation is not a violation of freedom of speech, but in general. But what you got to think of is you might want this type of regulation when your side's in power. You got to also think about, do I want this type of regulation when my side's not in power? Do I want the bureaucrats that work for Donald Trump to be able to say, oh, this is misinformation, you guys should get rid of that? Do I want the bureaucrats that could work for Vice President Harris to say, oh, that's misinformation, you can get rid of that? So don't just think about it as to what it might limit your opponents from saying and doing. What might it limit you from saying or doing? Which for me says the most constitutional and safest case here is to say, hey, we're in a democracy, and anytime you have a democracy, you have to trust the people to have a level of discernment, because you'll never get rid of all the lies and all the misdirection that are part of society. That's part of society. We certainly don't want to encourage it, but we know we can't get rid of all of it, meaning pursuant to the government. Are there maybe mediating institutions can step in, and maybe we can start some initiatives or whatever that are private that help people get better information or help people see what is false. That's one answer. Every answer isn't about the government and government regulation. All right. But in a democracy, we have to trust the people to have a level of discernment and a level of thoughtfulness to see through some of these things. Of course, not everybody's going to do that. But a democracy doesn't work if you can't trust the people. Because a lot of what this comes down to, especially when we're talking about people in high places, is they don't trust the people to be able to decipher through this. And sometimes they don't. But guess what? You can't have a democracy. You can't really have a true republic if that doesn't happen. And so there's got to be a level of trust there. Unless we're talking about regulating things so that, it may not affect kids as much. And most of the time, those regulations got to come from parents anyway. I'm not so sure that we should get government into the business of regulating what we call, or what somebody might call, misinformation, when the definition of that or the scope of what that means could vary and could be very biased and manipulated. I'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And we are back on the Church Politics Podcast with Justin Gibney, aka Bishop Cooper's grandson. And I hope we've all taken the opportunity to pray for all the people who were recently impacted by Hurricane Helene. As we know, that came through last week and devastated people in southern Georgia, parts of Florida, and seriously in parts of North Carolina. And people are still suffering from that. And one of the questions I want to talk about as we, get ready to talk about Hurricane Milton, which by the time you hear this may have already come through, so I don't know exactly what the devastation will be. But I want to talk about how these type of disasters, in a way, always are to some extent political, but how they shouldn't be political, if that makes any sense. All right. One way that the disasters like this are political is that the government obviously has a role in preventing them. When something like this happens, helping people, whether it's rescue, whether it's providing food or whatever, disaster relief, the government has a role in disaster relief. Okay. So in a way, there's always going to be some kind of political aspect that's a part of it. For instance, we can talk about FEMA. Now, one of the things that I was very disappointed in was FEMA coming and basically saying, Mayorkas saying, we don't have enough money to get through hurricane season. To me, that is legislative malpractice. Now, there are different narratives as to why. The Democrats would say, well, Republicans limited the funding. They wouldn't vote for more funding. Republicans are now saying Democrats gave money to illegal immigrants and took money away from the disaster relief. We can litigate that all day. I'll be honest with you. I'm not exactly sure which of those both things could be true. I'm not exactly sure which of those primarily led to FEMA not having enough money. And so I'm actually waiting to see some investigative journalism on that. I don't want to come in and say I know when I don't necessarily know which one was primarily responsible for that. But as always, both sides have their narratives. And that's how events like this become political. There's always elements of politics, but I don't think we should go so far into, we should do our best to make it not political because people are suffering. And these are the instances when we need to work together, not necessarily be focused on the finger pointing, even though at some point, someone maybe needs to be held accountable for FEMA not having enough money. That to me is ridiculous. And especially looks bad with how much money is going to other places. And we don't have something that is a necessity. We don't have money to pay for something that is really a necessity when these disasters happen. So Helene caused this damage. Now we have Hurricane Milton in Florida. Again, it may have hit by the time you hear this, but I don't know exactly how much damage it's going to cause. But what is being said is that it's worse than Helene. That this might be, at least as it's coming up to Florida, that this might be one of the worst hurricanes they've seen, or at least the speed of it is almost unseen. So that is scary. And I hope, again, that we're taking time to pray for the people of that are in the way of Milton, and just asking for mercy, just asking, for the best for these people. Hopefully, people. The good thing is they gotten heads up, and hopefully people get out the way. But we don't know what type of devastation is going to come with this. And so again, this should not be highly political, but again, it's become political. And so one of the ways that this has become political, even more than it has to be, is, and I'm going to let you watch the clip, but basically there's a dispute between Governor DeSantis, who's the governor of Florida, Vice President Harris, on a call that was made. So she's saying she made a call to his office to try to help, and that he refused her call, and that was political. So I'm going to let you listen to this, and I'm going to let you hear what Biden has to say about it. So first, we're going to listen to Kamala Harris, then we're going to listen to DeSantis, then we're going to listen to what Biden had to say, and we'll be right back.
Moments of crisis, if nothing else, should really be the moment that anyone who calls themselves a leader says they're going to put politics aside and put the people first. People are in desperate need of support right now, and playing political games with this moment in these crisis situations, these are the height of emergency situations, is just utterly irresponsible, and it is selfish, and it is about political gamesmanship instead of doing the job that you took an oath to do, which is to put the people first.
And I've been in touch with both FEMA and the president, as well as marshaling all our state agencies and working to support our local communities. And so for Kamala Harris to try to say that my sole focus on the people of Florida is somehow selfish is delusional. She has no role in this. In fact, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. I've dealt with a number of storms under this administration. She has never contributed anything to any of these efforts. And so what I think is selfish is her trying to blunder into this. No. And here's the thing. She has no role. No, she has no role in this process. I'm in contact with the president of the United States. I'm in contact with FEMA director. I'm obviously managing all our state agencies. We're supporting all our local government. And I will say this. I've had storms under both President Trump and President Biden, and I've worked well with both of them. She's the first one who's trying to politicize the storm, and she's doing that just because of her campaign. She's trying to get some type of an edge. She knows she's doing poorly, and so she's playing these political games. I don't have time for political games. I've got people whose lives are on the line. I've got people whose homes and their possessions are on the line, and we are focused 100% on that mission. I'm not worried about playing her political games. And so she is being selfish by trying to blunder into this when we're working just fine.
The governor of Florida has been cooperative. He said he's gotten all that he needs. I talked to him again yesterday, and I said, no, you're doing a great job. It's all being done well. We thank you for it. And I literally gave my personal phone number to call. So I don't know. There was a rough start in some places, but every governor from Florida to North Carolina has been fully cooperative and supportive and acknowledged what this team is doing. And they're doing an incredible job. But we got a lot more to do.
So you heard that. You hear Kamala Harris basically saying, I tried to reach out to him. He won't speak to me. That's playing politics. DeSantis saying, not only did I never receive a call, she's never called me about any of this before. She has nothing to do with it. Why is she calling me now? She's actually the one making it political, not me. Then you have Biden saying that he's actually had conversations with DeSantis, that the conversations went well, and they're coordinating very well, and they've been going back and forth. I'm not even here to litigate who's right or wrong. I don't know if the call happened. I don't know if it didn't happen. I don't know what Harris's intentions were. And I don't know if DeSantis really did avoid the call for political reasons. I'm not going to litigate that right now. I think we can all guess. But I do want to say how that kind of conversation can reflect on how serious people are taking our country. Let me say this. I don't know hardly any politicians that during a campaign won't in some way use a big event to their advantage. That's just what they're going to use anything they can to move forward. That doesn't mean there's no politicians that wouldn't do that or wouldn't exploit it in the wrong way. I'm not saying that. But generally, when you have these major campaigns, they're going to be involved in these conversations, because guess what? If they're not involved, if Kamala didn't try to make a call, if she didn't go out there, guess what? They'd be saying, why ain't she out there? Right? So we know that both sides use this stuff against each other one way or the other. If I say something, then I'm wrong. If I didn't say something, then I'm wrong. What I'm asking of us who are listening and watching this is to keep our eye on what's most important. And so when we're deciding what we're going to retweet and what we're not going to retweet, if it's concerning, or what messages we're going to put out there, even what articles we're going to share, make sure that we're keeping our eye on what's most important, which is people are suffering and we need to find solutions. If what I'm sharing is going to cause people to be more partisan, or is going to be a distraction to the main issue that we should be focusing on, I too, as a citizen, as someone who has a voice, have a role to play in not making things more political than they have to be. All right? We have a role to play in that regard. And so even if our elected officials, even if the folks that are running for campaigns are making something more political than it has to be, I'm not here to litigate that on this particular issue. We don't have to go along with it. We don't have to support it. We don't have to encourage it. We don't have to incentivize it. We can say, hey, no, I don't care about that. I don't care if he's a Republican or she's a Democrat or who's saying what. Let's take care of this issue, because people are hurting. And these hurricanes have brought a lot of pain and suffering to a lot of Americans. Do we care? How much do we care? And do we care enough to put election stuff aside and focus on trying to help people? One of the main things that I dislike about election season is that a lot of people, a lot of partisans, think everything that goes on has to come down to whether it's giving their side an advantage or a disadvantage. And that's a lot of the criticism of the AND campaign. People are so into this particular electoral season that anything that is said on this podcast or anything that happens anywhere else that could possibly give an advantage to the other side, or possibly have their side not seem as great as they want them to seem, then they get upset. Rather than just saying, hey, everything, even during election season, everything is not about the election. Honesty and critique and making sure that we're finding solutions and being constructive citizens still has to go on, even if it's not politically expedient for you at the moment. And so what I'm saying is, I don't want us to be so caught up in the election that we're more worried about this back and forth between politicians than we are about making sure the solutions are getting found and people are getting help. Because it's very easy to slip into the position where we're only focused on the election and we only want to make sure that DeSantis looks bad or that Harris looks bad. And all the while, the thing that we should be paying attention to isn't getting the attention that it should get. So let folks argue if they want to about who was right or who was wrong on this. Let us do what we can to focus on the issue, bring some sobriety to the conversation, and not let the election control everything we do and be the master of our public witness during the season. I'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
All right, I am back on the Church Politics Podcast. During an interview, a recent interview that Vice President Kamala Harris had with 60 Minutes. She was asked who she thought America's biggest, I guess, threat or enemy was. Like, what was the biggest threat to America, or our biggest adversary? And it surprised a good number of people, at least they're acting surprised, that she said Iran. That Iran and, basically what's going on in the Middle East, that was one of the biggest threats that we saw. Now, some people would have said China, maybe other people would have said Russia, but she said Iran, which just brings up the whole conflict going on in the Middle East, a very serious conflict, a conflict which some people say could be the cause of World War III. Now, obviously, the Biden administration is not in an easy spot. This isn't an easy issue. Israel is an ally. They are in the middle of a very serious back and forth. And you have, people like Trump, who's obviously running to be the next president, saying, well, if I was in office, this wouldn't have happened. And unless he was somehow going to prevent October 6th, I don't know exactly how he can say that. But a lot of people are saying, well, where's the line to be drawn? Most are saying, yes, Israel does have a right to defend itself. I think the big controversy is to what extent the American government should help Israel as they continue to kind of bombard not only, Gaza, but now, Lebanon, and now the back and forth with Iran. A very serious back and forth. What should be done and how do we move forward here? To add to that, recently, thinker and writer Ta-Nehisi Coates has written a new book. And his new book is entitled The Message. And it's really in support, or I would say, I haven't read it yet, so let me not say too much, but it really seems to be in support of the Palestinian cause. And he's received a lot of criticism and some support. He had a CBS News interview, which some people say kind of went left. Now, some are saying that the interviewer, one of the co-hosts, was too harsh. Others are saying that he was just being a journalist. Again, I'm not here to litigate that today, but it's something to keep your eye on, because this is a very serious issue. And it's an issue that I would say is a big divide within the church. I would say that a lot of white evangelicals that I know would say, hey, let Israel do what it has to do. It got attacked. It deserves to defend itself. And this is part of war, what's happening in Gaza and other places. Whereas if you go more so to a lot of folks in the Black church, aren't necessarily saying that Israel shouldn't defend themselves, but to what extent and how much should the U.S. be participating? A lot of people would say there needs to be a ceasefire to figure this out. That's a divide that you have even within the church. One thing that I want to do for you is, again, not come down to a final conclusion for you on that matter. I think we all have to pray about it, and we need to know the facts, and we need to be paying attention to it, because it impacts us, not only us, but it impacts our neighbors, our Jewish neighbors, our Muslim neighbors, but also the Christians that are in Palestine, right? It's something that we have to think about. One thing that might help you think about this in a different way and about what the Biden administration could or should be doing is a little bit of historical context. When you have an ally, when is it okay to say, hey, that's enough? Or when is it okay to say, hey, I'm not going to support this or that? Do we ever do that? Do we ever do that with Israel? And I saw a post, and I think I saw this first on Breaking Points. And it's I saw it on Twitter, and it's the Surfs TV, at the Surfs TV, that gave a decent history on how some other presidents have handled their relationship with Israel when they think Israel might be going too far, might need to be checked. Okay, and so let me give you some of that history. First is Dwight Eisenhower. Okay. During the Suez Crisis of the 1950s, then President Dwight Eisenhower leveraged the threat of sanctions to convince Israel to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula. That's according to AP. In 1953, the Eisenhower administration also temporarily delayed $26 million in funding to Israel over its construction of a hydroelectric project on the Jordan River. All right. Back in 1981, former President Ronald Reagan indefinitely delayed 2 shipments of F-16 fighter jets to Israel over the escalating level of violence in the Middle East. The following year, the Reagan administration warned Congress that Israel might have violated its arms agreement with the U.S. by using American-made weapons during its invasion of Lebanon, and that's according to the New York Times. In 1983, Reagan reaffirmed that he would not send F-16 jets to Israel until Israel withdrew its forces from Lebanon. Until these forces are in the position of occupying another country that now has asked them to leave, we are forbidden by law to release those planes. That's President Ronald Reagan speaking. And lastly, in 1992, the Bush administration threatened to withhold the delivery of $10 billion in loan guarantees to Israel if it continued building settlements in the occupied West Bank in Gaza. That's according to the Washington Post. So you see this complicated matter going on in Gaza, going on between Israel and Palestine, between Israel and Lebanon, now Israel and Iran. And you see how presidents in the past have dealt with it. Now, this is not the exact same situation, but there have been instances where somebody says, hey, you deserve to defend yourself. How you do it matters, and what you're doing, how you go about these things matter. All right. That's something I think we have to keep in mind as this goes on, while I would think most people would say not completely tying Israel's hands when there are threats around them as well. I just want people, I guess what I'm trying to get through in this segment is I want people to be thoughtful about how the U.S. is going about this instead of just going along with your leftward or rightward narrative. What has happened in the past may help us understand what our options are today and how we can handle this without it getting out of control. I think the last thing anybody wants is a World War III situation. And I don't want to be alarmist to say, hey, that's inevitable, that's what's coming today. But I do want to say it is a possibility if this goes any further, because what we do know is if the Middle East kind of erupts even further, that's likely to draw the United States in even more. But maybe even more than that, that's likely to take more lives. So how do we get this to a place where less people are dying and we can come to a solution? That's what I want Christians to be thinking about. And I just want, as you listen to people saying what the U.S. should do, what the U.S. can do, and what it can't do based on its relationship with an ally, think of those instances, and it may help us shape our opinion a little more. All right? Very serious issue. We should take it seriously, and we should care about everybody whose lives have been changed and taken in this conflict, in this war. All right? Well, campaign, you know what it is. There's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Kemp. Well, holla at you.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.